Welcome all. I'm going to give a few minutes for folks to join, and then I'll give some reminders, and then we'll get started. Today is going to be a great webinar, and I'm excited about some of the information to share with you. I will say in preparation, although it won't be on the recording, that my thought process on motivating non-compliant children has changed over the course of the years, both on how I've what interactions I've seen with kids, as well as some philosophies from some incredible individuals that I respect a great deal, and I'll be sharing those names with you here in just a few minutes. But I also, and you'll hear this again, if folks want to interact with me during the webinar and ask a question or make a comment, the chat bar is open and we will be monitoring that. But welcome Adam, Claudia, great to have you, Jennifer, Karen, Lee, Libby, so glad you've joined us, Maribel, Patricia, and I hope I say this name correctly, Zhu Lee, and Zia. So we're thrilled to have you. If we just give us another minute to get started, we will do so here shortly. Okay. Hi there, my name is John Willson. I'm SOAR's Executive Director, and I'm delighted that you've joined us for our November webinar in our monthly webinar series. Today's webinar is called Salting the Hay, Motivating Your Non-Compliant Child. While I share a couple pieces of information, check out my little graphic of the horse saying, "No, I don't want to drink." I also want to remind you that you can go onto our website and look at any of the webinars we've been doing for the last 3 years. We have some great topics. And then next month, we'll be doing a webinar in December and called The Art of Negotiation. As we all know, our kids are tremendous negotiators. I would like to remind you that you can interact with me via the chat bar, and you can ask questions or make comments. We'll be monitoring those, and I will take time to answer any questions you may have. So I also would encourage you to check out our website at soarnc.org. We have courses this summer scheduled, and we'll be taking kids down to the Florida Keys this winter break, and we're all really excited. So anyway, let's get started. So there are two schools of thought. The first school says that kids would do better if they wanted to, and therefore, as somebody who believes that, you would then want to make them want to, and typically the ways you encourage or create motivation for those types of children is you either create honey, or you have vinegar, and you will motivate them to do the right thing because they won't want to have to go through the consequence. The other school of thought is kids would do better if they could. And if that is what you believe, then essentially you believe that your role isn't necessary to make them want to do something, but to remove the barriers that are impeding them from being able to do better. Now, very clearly, the idea of natural logical consequences has been around for years and years and years. Russell Barkley has some really fine work on how to work with non-compliant kids. And then the other strategy, collaborative parenting, Ross Green, I would highly recommend anyone go look at his website because he's just absolutely extraordinary. And his idea of collaborative parenting, or I call it collaborative synergy, is you're looking for win-win situations and you're trying to remove the impediments. I'm going to try today to marry those two things. And so we'll see how I do. You let me know kind of as we get into this. All right, so let's talk about honey for a minute. All right. One of the ways that we can utilize reward-based opportunities is that we allow folks to, rather than giving access, permanent access in a gift to somebody, or you allow them to rent, or they're allowed to use something. I'll give you an example. The use of the computer. A lot of our kids are really motivated by being able to play on the computer. Well, the computer is a family asset that they're allowed to use versus this is their computer. And therefore, if you are cooperating and providing the kind of support that you need to for the family, and following through with your responsibilities, you earn use of that resource. And inversely, when you are not doing those things, you've lost use of that resource versus it's mine. You can't take that from me. It's mine. It's my game. I've even had families, take the video game players or the Xbox or the PlayStation, and it stays into a locked cabinet, and then they get time with that. And certainly those kinds of motivators are really important to kids, but being able to have the opportunity to earn those things. Also, in the honey aspect is the idea that you can frame consequences in the positive. So instead of saying, you've lost that privilege, you can say these are the things that you're going to need to accomplish to earn that privilege. And if you do so, then these are the rewards. So what you can earn versus what's going to be taken away. I think it's also really important to keep things relevant to the things that matter to them. And you're going to find that as kids grow older, those things are going to change. And your systems about how to interact with them are going to change. And so continually trying to discover that thing that motivates your child. There is something out there that your child is just really invested in that you need to know about. And utilizing that resource in a positive, healthy, productive way can certainly be to your benefit. Understanding what motivates kids is just really critical. And this is some great work that was done by Rick Lavoie. And then he pulled a lot of his information from research on the kinds of things that kids, were drawn to, and marketing companies selling things to kids. But praise is certainly one of them. And if praise is the primary motivator for your child, then I would encourage you to think about ensuring your comments focus on things they can control. I want to talk about that here in just a second. In a more focused way. If their focus is rewards, then make sure that those rewards are meaningful and thoughtful and matter to them. If validation and prestige is the thing that motivates your child, continued validation and public acknowledgement. Social media is an amazing place for that. I'm going to do one right now. My daughter was elected homecoming queen. And she was elected homecoming queen, I believe, because she's just so kind and sweet and nice to everybody. And the student body just really appreciated that about her. And so this is my validation and public acknowledgement about what an amazing young lady Landry is. All right, power and control. If power and control is that thing that motivates them, make sure that their choices are clear. You have clear expectations and accountability. And this is where collaborative parenting really comes into play, because you are involving them in the process of decision making about how things are going to happen in a way that makes sense to them and can be really powerful. And then, of course, my kids, both of my kids, time and kindness, quality interactions, loving affection, quality time is the thing that really motivates my kids. So what motivates your kids? What motivates you? Which of those areas do you find are the most specifically important to how you become motivated to experience something? Now, going back to the title, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? But what can you do? Well, you can salt the hay, and salting the hay, you can make the horse thirsty. And so this entire workshop is about ways to help make kids thirsty, especially kids who are non-compliant. And a big step is understanding those things that absolutely motivate your non-compliant child. Is it praise? Is it rewards? Is it validation and prestige? Is it power and control? And for many non-compliant kids, it is power and control. Is it time and kindness? And that one matters too. Okay, let's talk about praise. Carol Dweck, who's done some absolutely amazing work on growth mindset, did a wonderful research study with the New York City Public Schools, and she took 400 fifth graders, and she gave 200 of them, or they all took the same test. 200 of those kids, she said, "Congratulations, you scored the best score on this test. You're amazing. You're our best and brightest." And the other 200, she didn't even talk about the results. She just said, "Wow, the effort that you put into this was absolutely amazing. Well done. I'm so delighted with your effort. Thank you so much." She then had the kids all take a more difficult test. What do you suppose happened? Well, the students who were the best and brightest, the anxiety came up. There was a lot of head scratching. Pencils were breaking. There was just really, really an incredible amount of stress. And can you guess why? It's because I don't know these answers. I'm no longer going to be the best and brightest. The 200 kids that she gave that she only praised their effort, you didn't see those same stress symptoms. All they had to do was try. And so 6 months later, she came back and she gave the first test to all the students again. What do you think happened? The best and brightest, their scores went down. The kids that were only praised for their efforts, their scores went up. So the lesson is that when you praise things, when you praise children for things they have no control over, like their looks or their intelligence, then you're really doing them a disservice. But when you praise them for things that they can control, their effort, their ability, their work ethic, the amount of time they'll invest in trying to accomplish something, you really do begin to help children see themselves based on their strengths rather than their challenges. And I think that's a really important distinction. Okay. Gary Chapman taught us, know your child's love language. What is my love language? Our words of affirmation, physical touch, quality time, acts of service, gifts. Like I mentioned before, my kids, my Landry loves words of affirmation, but both of my kids, absolutely quality time is their love language. Think about your child for just a moment. And I would love to see folks in the chat bar list what they believe their child's love language is. I'll give you just a second to think about that as I talk about each of them. Words of affirmation, again, kind of, giving them, I love you. My kids do not go a day without hearing that they are loved. I appreciate you. Opportunities to share with them the absolute efforts that you thought, that they made that you deeply appreciated. Physical touch, a hug, a well-placed hug, a hand squeeze, a back rub. Those are all wonderful ways that when we physically engage with our kids, we let them know how much we care about them. Quality time. One of the great things that we have done as a family is every year, each of us, my wife and I, each take each child on an individual something, an excursion, a trip, and then we do things together as a family. And it's just so important that kids get a chance to experience those things. I don't see anybody in the chat bar yet giving me some thoughts. I would love for you just to kind of think out loud. What is your child's love language? Acts of service. Something as simple as we have teenagers, and we'll drive over and make sure that we fill their car with gas, or just finding ways to help them, even sit down with them, work on homework. And then certainly thoughtful gifts are always really, really well received, and people love them very, very much. Okay. Moving on, validation. Let me ask you the question, how do you prefer to be approached when receiving critical feedback in either a work or a emotional relationship? And my guess is a lot of those things are important to your kid, but I really like it when I begin a conversation, and whatever my perspective is, it's not being argued against at first, that I'm being validated, that, hey, this is important. So when you validate where somebody is coming from, and try and understand what they're trying to tell you, either in their actions or their words, that's so critical, because it's going to change the approach you take to help them understand where you're coming from. But validation is such a absolutely remarkable way for kids to move forward in a conversation. Come to the conversation from a place of mutual respect. If somebody's voice starts to get loud, and they're getting animated, then pull back a little bit and say, hey, listen, we're just having a thoughtful conversation. Or if they get ugly with you, a technique that I have always used is, hey, you know what? I want to have this conversation with you, but I'm not going to continue to do so until you've moved to a place where we can have that conversation. And this is what that normally looks like. Fine, I didn't want to tell you anyway. And they storm upstairs. But eventually they're going to want to have that conversation because there's something on the end of it that matters to them. And then one of my kids might come down and say something like, okay, fine, I'm sorry. And I'll say, that just didn't really come off like a super legitimate apology. Again, I really want to have that conversation. So when you're really ready to kind of share with me what's going on with you, and why you're kind of throwing that kind of ugliness at me, again, I'm willing to continue, but I'm not going to do so until you've given that some thought. And then that conversation can happen on terms that are based on mutual respect and also a calm demeanor. Nothing good gets accomplished with a non-compliant child when you are escalated and they are escalated and you're just doing this at each other. All right. That's awesome. We're getting some more words of affirmation. Appreciates uninterrupted screen time. Boy, don't they all. All right. I love that y'all are thinking about it. Another one that is really important is reflective listening. And so you all know what that looks like. So what I'm hearing you saying is that this is what really matters to you, but you're doing it in your own words so that they can know that you're in tune with what matters to them, and try and begin the dialogue from that place. Again, this is a collaborative situation. You are validating where they're coming from, and then you're having a collaborative conversation about how to move forward based on what they want, and then you weave into that what you want. If I have a really, really angry kid on my hands, sometimes we're going to spend more time talking about things that don't matter, just to rebuild that trust, bond, and rapport. And then I won't bring up the issue at hand until they do. And then we're now open to have that conversation. Because if I feel listened to, heard, and validated, it opens me up to your feedback. Okay, let's talk a little bit about vinegar. The use of natural logical consequences, again, can be really productive way to manage behavior. A discipline menu. If you know that if you do this, this is what's going to happen. If at our house, it was, if you jump on the computer before you finish your homework, you've lost your computer for the rest of the night. And then I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about a very interesting dynamic for younger kids, about how to effectively use timeout in a way when you have a non-compliant child. Okay, so natural and logical consequences. I despise punishment. Punishment is random. It is sometimes just punitive and overly severe. But when you can utilize natural and logical consequences, that's just really, really the best and most powerful way to go about doing this. A natural consequence is defined as something that happens without any additional interference from you. It's going to happen. Shoes are left out in the rain, you wear wet shoes. A bicycle is left out in the rain, the chain is going to rust, or the bike gets stolen. That's a natural consequence. A logical consequence is one that is defined, that is created by an adult, that has some sort of relation back to the behavior. And so, a put down, if a kid puts another kid down, or puts somebody down in the family, they owe them 3 put-ups. At our house, we would play what's my favorite thing about you game. And so if somebody put somebody down, I would say, oh, goody, we get to play what my favorite thing about you game. And so that would be a logical consequence to that. Another one, one of the ones that I mentioned, if you leave the bike out, a logical consequence is that you've lost the use of that bike for a day. All right, let's look at some others, right? Okay, so you put somebody down. I've talked about giving 3 put-ups. You won't clean the dishes. Okay, you know what? It was your turn to clean the dishes. You didn't clean the dishes. We're going to have this meal. You can have this meal that doesn't require any use of dishes to cook on, because you weren't willing to do your part. Curses, come up with 3 alternatives. Continue to annoy other people, just separate them. Displays unsafe behavior, they don't get to participate in the activity they're displaying unsafe behavior in. They hit somebody, well, you've got to make restitution. You've got to come up with really quality ways to deal with that. They walk away without permission. Rather than make a big deal about it, you're just going to become their shadow. You don't want me to be your shadow? Stop walking away without permission. Work with me here. And then if they're impulsive or impulsive inappropriateness, right, then redirect, because a real thing in my life has been, I impulsively blurt things out sometimes, and I didn't mean any harm to anybody. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I just simply made an impulsive decision and made an impulsive phrase, and now, that's it. Impulsivity happens. So redirection is always going to be your best way to deal with impulsive inappropriateness. So, and someone just wrote, cursing is hard to deal with, especially when it's directed at me. And that's true. And so that's where either planned ignoring, and you really do try and ignore it, or you have, you set up with them that nothing happens for you until, you've made restitution because you said something ugly. One of the things that I do, particularly with non-compliant kids, is I try and set up in advance with them, ways that you can vent your anger and frustration towards me that we can both live with. Because telling me that you think I'm a jerk, I can live with that. Calling me an effing jerk and telling me to F off, I can't live with that. And so I'm not going to, and I don't treat you that way. And so I'm not going to engage with you when you engage with me in that kind of a manner. All right, so let's talk about, with younger kids, how we can deal with I'll answer your question, Lee, about ignoring. Lee wrote, we've done both of those suggestions with cursing. If we ignore it, he says it's hypocritical and he will ignore us. Okay, you can ignore us, but when you need or want something, what we're trying to do is create a dynamic that both of us believe is thoughtful and respectful. And we're only going to interact with you when that respectfulness is in play. And so whether or not you need something is going to determine whether you can get that thing, your level of respectfulness. And so what can we do to help draw out and help you, how can we interact with you that makes you want to be more respectful with us? That's that collaborative parenting piece. What are the barriers? Well, what are the triggers for you that get you so angry that you interact with us in that way? And can we find a way to remove those barriers? All right, I'm going to talk you through this effective use of timeout. And again, this is something I would do with younger kids, not necessarily teenagers. All right, but if I've got a non-compliant child who is simply not going to follow through, and I guess you could work this. It could be something else, not a timeout. But I give a precision command. All right, if compliant, then the child gets a token or they get a reward, and the command may be in this situation, it's time to go clean your room. All right. And one of two things is going to happen. They're going to say yes, no, or what if I don't? And so a precision command would be, please make sure that in the next 5 minutes, you go to your room and start cleaning. All right. If they are not compliant, restate with a countdown and the stated consequence. The example might be timeout, right? So you now have 4 minutes to go clean your room. And if you don't do so, I'm going to put you in timeout, or there's going to be this consequence. Now, again, one of three things is going to happen. They're either going to not comply, or they're going to comply, or they're going to wait until 4 minutes and 1 second and then comply, just so that they had some power and control. If they're not compliant, go ahead and place them in timeout. If after the timeout, repeat the command in the process and do it all over again. You now have 5 minutes to go clean your room. If a child won't comply with a timeout, here's that whole lead the horse to water, and they refuse. The non-compliant child won't even take the timeout. Then this is how I turn the tables. Okay, you won't take the timeout? All right. Now you have to wait 5 minutes before you can take that timeout. What? You have to wait 5 minutes before you can even start that timeout. Well, what does that mean? And then you go radio silent. No interactions. No TV. No, they're basically in purgatory waiting. That 5 minutes is up, and you can say, okay, you can now take that time out. And you're going to repeat that cycle over and over and over until you get compliance. For really difficult kids, this is the kid that really absolutely battles, and they're always the no kid. They always say no, and you find yourself like, what do I do? How do I get this kid to comply? Well, you just keep extending it. They're going to take that initial 5-minute timeout at some point, because they don't have any accesses to any resources that are within your purview to distribute. They're basically, you shut things down for that child until they finally comply. Now, it is very rare that this is the child that I need to go to do this, but in severe non-compliant battles, sometimes with kids, I absolutely have found this to be critically effective. Okay, so this is not collaborative parenting. This is definitely consequence oriented. Let's start moving a little bit more towards collaborative parenting. All right. So when we involve a child in the process of setting guidelines, all right, choosing goals, determining limits, finding ways to overcome barriers, what happens is when we involve them in the process and we create choices for them, all right, and they're allowed to help us determine what some of the ways to overcome those barriers are, we create empowerment. And when we create choices and empowerment, we start moving towards working together to collaboratively problem solve, and then there's much more investment. And so all kids are different, and not one size fits all kids. I find this collaborative synergy process to be much more effective with more kids than anything else, because kids like to have choices. They like they absolutely are empowered when you take into consideration what they are thinking about and what they want to do and what they believe are going to be the effective strategies that are going to come into play. Again, I highly recommend anybody that is interested in this to review Ross Green's Collaborative Parenting, because it is an absolutely critical way to up your game. In fact, I've encouraged family members and close friends who have non-compliant kids to think about this collaborative parenting, collaborative synergy process. Okay, so how do we develop empowerment? And there are some fun ways to do that. All right, you can have your child plan a family night out. You can, one of my favorite ways is you simply ask your teen, hey, can I coach you up here? Can we look at this? And your teen is going to say, yes, I want your advice. No, please, thank you for asking, but no, I don't want your advice. Or often what they'll do is they will um, they will come back and ask you then for support. Can folks hear me? Someone has a concern about the mic. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay. All right. The next thing I would encourage is encourage volunteer work or mentoring or something beyond themselves, so that you're encouraging interest but giving them the authority to kind of figure out how they want to give back to society and learn a new skill. Somebody asked, they wanted some examples of collaborative parenting, and here's one. What we do at SOAR and what I've done at the home is I list out here, this was the problem. All right. And for instance, with my son, the problem was that he was coming home and he would jump on the computer and then he would get lost on the computer and he wouldn't get his homework done. And so we sat down and said, okay, what are we gonna do about this? And so what we worked out and in conversation is, he said, Dad, the truth is that when I get home, I'm so tired of like working my brain that that I just need that rest time, and being on the computer with my friends just sort of lets me come down a bit. And then and if I don't get my homework done, then I lose that privilege the next day. Can we try that? All right. And so we tried that, and that didn't work, as he wasn't getting things done and his grades started to drop. And so we re-examined it, looked at it again. And I said, when is your brain the freshest? And he said, well, it's the freshest in the morning. And then, it's also pretty fresh right after school, but, and so what we decided to do is the school offered a study hall at the end of school that was 45 minutes long. And he had a professor or teacher that was there that could help with homework. And he would spend that 45 minutes doing homework. So when he finally came home, he was free and clear and his homework had been done. And if there were projects that he needed to work on, he would simply ask. He came up with that strategy. We worked out how to make sure that those resources and skills were in place, and it absolutely worked like a charm. So when you have them participate in the rulemaking and the limit setting, it becomes a game changer. And then certainly collect input whenever you're putting together a family constitution or what the family rules are going to be, so that you can enjoy each other in a remarkable way. And everybody has input and say into how the family is going to come up with the family rules. Okay. With non-compliant children, very often part of it is that they see themselves as a disruptor. But when they begin to see themselves based on their successes and their strengths and their abilities, that can really help start to change the game. So when you focus on they have a challenge list, they have a victory list. When your victory list is significantly larger than your challenge list, then I think you're on the right track. I would say that your victory list has to be even bigger than you think. All right. All right, here's some strategies. Again, the strong-willed child who can typically be non-compliant. Key to their strengths, their talents, and their interests. Provide a menu of choices. What are their natural motivators? Use the team approach. Direct or bend don't break their spirit. And then I love the idea of permission to coach. And I'll tell you, there are some things not to do, right? And that is, do these strategies work? Does nagging work? Is it effective? How about when you get angry and you poke the bear, right? I think most of us have seen that wonderful movie, The Breakfast Club. And he's like, Bender, I got you for two months, right? Because he kept poking the bear. Is that ever been successful? And then I've done other videos where I talk about, you've got gas or water, and you've got a situation that's brewing, and if you douse it with water and the right solution, it kind of fizzles out. But if you douse it with gas, it kind of blows up in your face. And then sometimes, what happens is we thought this was water, but it turns out it was gas, and then we had a big problem. But other times we knew the difference, and we ourselves were kind of in an aggravated place. And I looked at it and I said, water, yes, water, set the water down, and you decide to go ahead and put gas on that. And why on earth would we do that? We know it's going to be a bigger mess now that we're going to have to clean up. Well, part of it is you've been triggered, right? And so when you're triggered, you pour gas on the fire. But do those strategies ever get you what you want? They don't. And so I would also ask you to ask these questions. Am I skilled at the following? Knowing when to engage, when to interact, and when to pull back and ignore. One of the greatest lessons I've ever learned with this population of kids is that I do not have to attend every argument that I'm invited to. I just don't. And when kids try and paint me into a box because they're not willing to even promote, and Lee, this goes to your question about, he doesn't want to suggest anything that doesn't allow what he wants. When you have those kinds of situations, there has to be some synergistic energy. This is what I want. This is what you want. How can we figure out how to figure out something that is better than what both of us want and still meets both of our needs? Avoid getting sucked in. Our kids are really good at trying to draw us into battles. And when we decide to get sucked into those battles, it's a lose-lose situation. So being able to disengage and just walk away and create a safe space for you to take a timeout, a personal timeout, and to give them the space and energy to come back. Almost always, I have a better, more productive conversation with my kids when I'm not in a triggered place. All right, here's some strategies to avoid, like my little monster over here. Take away something the child has earned, okay? If they've earned it, don't take it away. You lose credibility when you do something like that. When you yell, scream, or become argumentative, again, not going to be productive. You're just going to, animate the situation. Never threaten something you're really not ready to do, right? Because if you're really not ready to, and you threaten it and they call your bluff, what then? Don't get caught up in semantics, right? Because sometimes, kids will want to find the loopholes and get and just stir the conversation in a direction that you're not ready for it to go, or that you didn't want it to go. Stay focused. Make sure that you keep the main thing the main thing. Don't interact with your child while you're angry. Nothing positive is going to come from that. I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, his name is Reed, and he's become a dear friend as an adult. And I love Reed, and Reed calls me, once every couple of months to just check in. But Reed had done something on a trip, and I was very, very frustrated. And his great motivator, all he cared about was this shopping excursion that we were going to do. And I was angry with him for his misbehavior in a way that he had treated somebody else. And I said to him, "You think you're going shopping? You're not going shopping." And there was a Belizean $2 bill, which is worth about $1. And I ripped it right there in front of his face. I cannot begin to tell you how long it took to de-escalate Reed from that situation. And it was a terrible choice on my part. And, and I had to, truly beg his forgiveness, because I was angry and I interacted with him in a way that completely set him off. And I made a giant mess for myself. And when you do those things, yeah, you can laugh about them years later, but in the moment, they're not to your best interest, and they're not motivating a non-compliant child to do the things that you want them to do. Don't use a consequence you can't control. For instance, you can't see, you can't hang out with Jimmy anymore. Well, you can't really control that if you can't control, that he's going to see Jimmy at school, and then you don't know where he's going to be. So try and be careful not to use a consequence that you really don't have any control over. And then one of the things that I have always avoided my entire life with kids is I just never use the phrase, "I'm so disappointed in you." Because when I do that, I am not separating my appreciation and love for a child. And what they hear is, "I love you less." And that is not motivating. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up here with a couple final thoughts. Be consistent. If you say it, do it. Follow through. Recognize that it is your child's responsibility. It's their job to test your limits. That's part of their job description. Let's review it for a second. Not be embarrassed, get away with as much as they can get away with, and test limits. That's their job description. It's going to happen. And so if you are prepared and ready to deal with some of those things, you're going to have a much more positive experience. And if you're willing to collaborate with them on how to push those limits within an acceptable way that allows them the chance to have some remarkable experiences, then you're well on your way to helping remove the barriers that don't allow them to be successful. Because ultimately, I believe personally that most kids would do better if they could. And it's my job to help them be able to do those things. I just mentioned, differentiate your disapproval of the behavior from your love for a child, and focus more on strengths, positive behaviors than failures. Positive behaviors rather than negative behaviors. When you focus on those things that are right about your child, then you begin to help them see themselves in a very different way than if you focus on the fact that they're a troublemaker, or they never comply, or here we go again. When they start to see themselves from that standpoint, it's not good. And then again, I think you look for collaborative opportunities. You try and find ways in little and if you have a very non-compliant child, perhaps you start with little things. If it could be that with younger children, it could be collaboratively figuring out how to make sure that they get ready for school on time. And how does that happen? Well, we do a bunch of the stuff at night. What Jimmy, do you think we can get done at nighttime and have everything ready by the door the night before? Yeah, those are great ideas. What I absolutely, if we had the backpack right there, that's a great idea, Jimmy. And then Jimmy might say, and I'm always running around trying to find my shoes. If we put the shoes right by the door, that'd be good. I'm like, that's a great idea. All right. Hey, what do you think about this? And then they, what if we pre-made your lunch? And Jimmy thinks about it for a second. He says, if we do that the night before, my sandwich might get soggy, and then I won't eat. And then later on in the day, I'll be grumpy because I didn't eat, because I hate soggy bread. And so now you get to figure out collaboratively how to solve the soggy bread problem. So when you work together in that kind of collaborative environment, you're going to see things from a perspective that perhaps you didn't. I'm going to give you one final piece, all right, before I close out this webinar. And it's about the best piece of advice a kid ever gave me. I was on a trip in the British Virgin Islands with a group of kids, and I asked them all. I said, "So, if you could give me one piece of advice as a parent, what would it be?" And their advice was this: when you come home and you walk in the door, make sure that the first thing you do is have a positive interaction with your kid, because what you want to have happen is when you walk in the door and they hear the garage open, they know it's you, they think to themselves, "Daddy's home," instead of, "Oh no, Daddy's home." And I realized that I had been making some of those mistakes. I would come home and the first thing I would see was that the kitchen wasn't clean, and it was their job to make sure that when they got home that they put away the dishes, and they didn't put away the dishes. And that's the first interaction we're having. Well, folks, it has been 3-4 years since I took that piece of advice, and it has fundamentally changed my relationship with my children. So in closing, figure out what your child's love language is. What are their motivators? find ways to create creatively, collaboratively, find synergy and problem solve with your kids, and only use those, for those rarest moments when it's time to butt heads, the opportunity to engage in that consequence limit setting, because many of our kids are not going to do well when that's our constant battle. And instead, if we can figure out together how to remove the barriers of success, we're all going to be much happier. I'm going to give folks on the chat just a couple seconds to ask on any questions they may have, and then we'll get started, or we'll close out. And remember, come back in December. The webinar in December is going to be, let's see, it is December 6th, Tuesday, December 6th, the art of negotiations. All right. And one of the questions is, can we get a copy of those suggestions and steps? Absolutely. We will send, we'll post on the website the webinar, and anyone who registered will get will get the PowerPoint. And you can share the link to this recording once it's live. You can share with anybody that you want to. These webinars are completely free and open to anyone who has a child with learning or attention challenges that may benefit from some of these thoughts and ideas. Let's see. What do you do when the kid says he's too stressed to do homework, basically get it overwhelmed? Do you push it? I am going to tell you that that's actually kind of a real thing. I'm from a collaborative standpoint, I'm going to take a look. I have some biases here before I answer this question that you should be aware of. And the first is that rarely do I think homework is an appropriate use of a child's time. There aren't a whole lot of studies that indicate that homework prior to 10th, 11th, 12th grade is even appropriate. But I would take a look at what the homework is, and then and is it reasonable? The next thing I would do is I would try and do some de-stressing activities. And then if I had a kid who was that anxious about doing homework and so overwhelmed, I would either, that hour that we're dedicating to homework, I'm going to be sitting here next to you and I'm going to be your external locus of control and we're going to do it together. Or if I had the means, I would hire somebody to kind of work through that with you and kind of make that a more enjoyable, less stressful experience. Because what your child is telling you, Carrie, is your child is saying, this is causing me incredible stress. And what I need to do is find a way to make this experience less stressful so I can be successful. And so the barrier to success has been identified, and now try and find creative strategies to deal with that. Again, for us, that was fairly real. And our solution, ultimately was, my kids really both got very good at making sure that they didn't come home with homework because they did at school. Are there any other questions that I can answer? Someone wrote, tutors can be easier for a relationship, and often kids may respond better to a tutor, especially if it's, a dynamic, young college kid that they like, and they look forward to seeing them. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to say, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I had a pleasure having a chance to interact with all of you today. And thank you so much for joining my webinar. Make sure that you tell others, tune in again on December 6th, and we'll see you after Thanksgiving. Bye, everybody.